Good afternoon. I want to begin by offering my sincere condolences to the family and the friends of Pentagon Force Protection Agency Police Officer George Gonzalez. Officer Gonzalez made the ultimate sacrifice on Tuesday of this week when he was stabbed and shot to death. Police officers across this country put on a uniform every day prepared to run toward danger that others would flee from. Fairfax County police officers were put in such a situation on July 19th. You have all just had an opportunity to listen to the 911 audio recordings and view the body camera footage of the police-involved shooting that took place at approximately 5:20 p.m. in the 8000 block of Gosport Lane in Springfield. This incident took place in a group home where vulnerable persons were sheltering in place in both the basement and in an upstairs bedroom without any avenue for escape. 2 veteran police officers arrived on the scene within several minutes of the 911 call. They knew people were in the house who feared for their lives and were in harm's way. Both of these police officers, veteran police officers, have many previous experiences with persons suffering from mental health and behavioral crisis. The officer involved in this shooting, in fact, had completed our crisis intervention training, our CIT training. It's also worth noting that officers attempted to de-escalate the situation and actually made a radio transmission requesting an officer with less lethal force to respond to the scene. However, the situation within the house unfolded very quickly, as you saw, and officers responded to the immediate and dynamic deadly threat. The suspect survived her injuries, and I pray for her speedy recovery, and I pray for her future wellness. It's important to remember that a knife is a deadly weapon. We don't have to look any further than what happened on Tuesday at the Pentagon for proof of that. The investigation into this incident is ongoing, so I'm prohibited from saying much more beyond my initial statement that I made from the scene. However, I do believe this video speaks for itself. I'll now take a few questions. Julie.
At one point, one of the officers, this all happened very fast, obviously, but one officer reversed quickly to less than lethal force. I mean, as you view this, were there any options, in your view, to try less than lethal force? And do you know what they might have considered?
Well, Julie, less lethal force as an option is important, not only for us, but police officers across this country. These less than lethal options have really just been made available to American law enforcement since the late 1990s. So I'll say, based on the speed and the dynamics of this situation, even if an electronic control weapon, AKA taser, or other less lethal weapon were on the scene, I'm not too sure that this situation would have necessarily lent itself to its use. It just happened so quickly. I will say, part of any post-police-involved shooting investigation also includes a review of our own internal policies. So I'm taking a hard look at the availability of our less lethal tools that we have, particularly our electronic control weapons, our tasers. Right now, the tasers are available to be used at every station, and in fact, officers are required to, if available, to take them on patrol. The difference is they're not issued to each and every police officer. So part of what I intend to do is actually issue tasers, electronic control weapons, to each and every operational police officer on the police department. But again, would a taser have made a difference at this scene? You all saw the video. It happened very, very quickly, very quickly. A knife is a deadly weapon. A knife is a deadly weapon, and the officer who discharged his firearm was certainly approached very quickly after he made several attempts to de-escalate by this suspect. Yes, sir.
We saw the video, but right before the shots were fired, what did you see from that woman in that kitchen?
Well, I think I saw what you saw. I've seen the same video, and we enhanced it. I think we showed you the raw footage in real time, and then it was important for us to enhance the video so you could attempt to see a little bit of what the officers saw. There was obviously a suspect armed with a knife, and as I said on the day of this police-involved shooting, that I'll say again today, and I'll couch it by saying there's an ongoing investigation and pending review from the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, is that the suspect in this case posed a deadly threat to our police officers. She approached our discharging police officer armed with a knife, and he discharged his firearm. We prioritize life in the Fairfax County Police Department, as do all police departments. There were other people in that home. And I think it's important to note that there were 2 people sheltered in place in the basement. And I know you've only had an opportunity to see this video once, and you're going to be sent a link to it so you can watch it again. But immediately behind our suspect, next to I think the refrigerator, are stairs down to a basement with no way out. There were 2 people downstairs. If our suspect would have been afforded the opportunity to go down those stairs into the basement, armed with that deadly weapon, that knife, we could have had a double homicide on the scene. So when the police officers are taking everything into account very, very quickly, because police officers are required to, in a condensed amount of time, under an enormous amount of stress, make life and death decisions, that was in their mind as well. They knew there were 2 people trapped in the basement. They knew there was a 3rd person who couldn't get out, who was trapped and sheltering in place in a basement upstairs. As you saw the video footage from the body camera number 1, you'll see that they first approached the front of the house. The reason why they were unable to negotiate that door was because it was a double deadbolt lock on it. They couldn't. And you can't see this very clearly, but there were people inside the home who were motioning the police officers to go around back because that was their only way in. Sierra?
Chief Davis, I know you said this is an ongoing investigation, but at this time, is there any specific reason or, why the woman was behaving in this way, or do you know a motive at this time, or anything about her mental state?
Yeah, I'd be speculating. I mean, I certainly, it was a group home, and I think all of us can see that she was in crisis. There's no doubt she was in crisis, whether it was a behavioral crisis or whether or not she suffers from a mental illness. I can't speak to that specifically, but she was certainly in crisis. I'm glad she survived from her injuries, and she's now recovering from what I understand. And I wish her, and the Fairfax County Police Department wishes her nothing but the very, very best in the future. I think I said on the scene on the day of this police-involved shooting that that home is not a stranger to the Fairfax County Police Department. We had been there before. And again, these police officers, both veterans, both well-respected on the agency, great reputations, have dealt with people in crisis before. They were, again, confronted with a really challenging, deadly situation in a condensed amount of time under an enormous amount of stress with other people in the home that were also in harm's way. Yes, ma'am.
Megan Clarity with WTOP. I'm wondering, since you said they knew where they were responding and she had already said to the 911 call taker, it was relayed that she wanted to take her own life. Do officers go in there knowing that this could possibly be a suicide by cop situation where she was trying to get hit? I mean, does that change the dynamic as far as their training and what they're planning to do when they go in?
Well, Megan, I would suggest that there's a fine line sometimes between someone who's suicidal and homicidal. Certainly one of the first things that folks will take away from this is, was this a suicide by cop scenario? We've seen that all too often in our profession for many, many years, as far back as I can remember being a police officer. But her individual crisis jeopardized other occupants of the home who didn't have a way out. And I think that's important to footnote. There were other folks in that house, and they were vulnerable as well. It's a group home with vulnerable individuals, and they couldn't get out. And if you remember the 911 call taker, she was asking the first caller if they could get out of the house, and she said no. So that's when the officers knew that they had to get in there, because again, we prioritize life, and we had to go in there and try to de-escalate it, try to disarm her, and try to save lives. And I do think we did save lives. Julie?
Chief, you said you saw examples of de-escalation. Just so the public can understand, what did you see happen that said to you there was an attempt?
Well, de-escalation takes many shapes and forms, and the verbal commands, drop the knife, stop. You heard that several times. You saw where the suspect was standing in the kitchen when the police officers entered the home, and then at some point you saw that she approached the officers and her position changed. So the de-escalation techniques, again, in the snap of a finger, those officers immediately entered the house. They saw her right away armed with a knife. They saw the position of the knife. I think we slowed it down enough that you all could see it was in her right hand, and she was holding it by the handle in this particular fashion with the blade pointed outward. So they saw how she was holding the knife. They obviously took in what her mental state was. They heard her say to them, no. They heard her say to them, I'm going to stab you. They're taking all that in as they're issuing verbal commands to her to drop the knife in a very chaotic situation. And that's tough to watch. It's tough to watch. But they were doing the best that they absolutely could under a very tough circumstance. Yes, sir.
To back on the taser question, I wasn't clear what you said before. Do they have tasers on them or in the vehicle? And then also, you mentioned you weren't sure because of how fast everything was happening if a taser would have made a difference. Could you expand on that a little bit?
So they did not have tasers on their person at the time. I don't believe they had tasers in their police cars that were parked in front of the home. As I mentioned earlier, tasers are assigned to district stations and operational units. There are more police officers than tasers. So part of my internal review will ultimately increase the number of tasers available to police officers, and I want to go so far as to assign them individually to police officers so that they're immediately available. So the second part of your question, when I mentioned that I wasn't so sure that a taser necessarily would have been used or effective, was because of the speed of this confrontation. And you saw it for yourself. It happens within a matter of seconds. So a taser, an electronic control weapon, is not deadly force. The suspect was armed with a knife, and that's deadly force. And when she approached the officer like she did within a matter of seconds, not only was she still armed with a deadly weapon, but she was approaching and advancing on the police officer who discharged his firearm. So I'm speculating when I say that I'm not so sure a less lethal weapon would have even been appropriate at that immediate moment when they entered the home.
Any more questions, guys?
Yes, sir.
Was she a member of this group home? Did the people there knew her already?
Yeah, I think it's safest to say she was a resident. I don't know if she was a member of anything, but she was a member of the group home. And again, there were 3 other occupants in the home. 2 were downstairs, and in the basement there's no sliding glass door. There's no door out. So the 2 people in the basement were sheltered in place. And at the top of those steps, when they came up to the kitchen, and you saw, I believe, one of the other residents come up the stairs at one point and literally pick up the knife. And you heard one of our police officers order her to drop the knife. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, that's a lot going on right there. And they gave her verbal commands. They de-escalated, and she did drop the knife, and thankfully she did that.
And what's the update on the officer?
The officer is relieved of, he's on restricted duty pending the results of a criminal and administrative investigation.
Thanks, everybody.
Anybody else? Thank you.